I write on the walls of my studio in charcoal, and one of the graffiti says, "Painting is silent and still, make it sound." We have hung this exhibition so tightly that when you first survey this room, it has a very busy effect. In a way, this is true of the story I am telling in these paintings. They depict the essential everyday activities in the lives of the fishermen on the Stade. Much has changed in the hundreds of years in which the Hastings fishing families have somehow survived and made their living in this intensive way. However, although boats and equipment and clothing have changed, the rhythms of the work are still determined by weather, tide and season, and the work is always hard, messy and dangerous. It is a miracle that in spite of this, such a thing as enough of a hold on the few. Compared to the artist I admire in the art of the past, my work has a rough and ready look. I could often have wished for a more refined technique, but I chose not to beautify things because I was stuck with what I saw and experienced, and the urgency to present it with as little aesthetic confection as possible. These paintings evolved gradually from the research of an intensive 18 months of drawing in all seasons in the presence of the activities, and they did not involve photography. Before I'd made the first of the paintings, I did not know how they would look to me. In spite of removing to the studio and workshop to make the structures and prepare the surfaces, I needed somehow to retain the immediacy of the drawings and for it to be raw. Since I was not motivated by nostalgia for something scenic, I was compelled to invent the appropriate techniques from scratch, as these paintings bore no resemblance to the work I'd made before in what seemed like another life. Painting is an archaic form, yet it persists in spite of everything. To practice it, you need to be driven, foolhardy, and brave. When I first embarked on the project in the 70s, I had no idea where it would take me, either as an artist or in my life, and that I would also be recording a history. This painting seemed to have the right shape to start this exhibition off, because it leads you in. You the viewer, are actually in the boat. I think I wanted to bring the attention up very close to the action, which is a very small action. In this case, it's just extracting this little fish from the net without getting stabbed by the spines, which are very poisonous. The main focus when I was trying to draw people was the fact that the hands are so busy. It's a dance, and they're incredibly delicate, even though the kind of work that they do takes its toll on the hands in a terrible way. But they still somehow had a delicacy with their touch, and perhaps that's what gave rise to this particular painting. This painting is called Feeding the Fire, and I've only just realised why we made it number 2 in this exhibition. It's because the dynamic relates to the first one we looked at. It's going the opposite way, but the arms are giving you the major push in both paintings. The fish boxes have to be marked with the registration number of each boat, so that when the fish goes to market, they know whose catch it was. And so that was often done by heating up something metallic and burning it into the plastic boxes. The fires were made on the beach. This is before health and safety got going, and it wasn't, there were bonfires and, as you'll see in the paintings, whenever they were needed. The surfaces that I decided to use were the fact that I'd found an oval ready-made, I think it's mahogany, on the dump on the beach. And I also found the black mounting board, it's half a door I believe, that was already burnt, and the piece of rope, and it all came together without me actually having to create it, except by putting it together. Boy tossing water over his rowboat. The fisherman's youngest sons often spent the summer on the beach, and there was always a rowboat. What's happening is that he's tossing water into it to stop the timbers from drying out because it would leak, and the whole atmosphere is a relaxed summertime situation. The whole shape of this painting, which is the centre of the wall, is like a smile, I think. At one time, this painting was called The Scale because this rather wonderful piece of machinery stood permanently on the beach. In the late 80s, some fishermen had begun to get on aeroplanes and go off to places like Spain, where it was discovered that cuttlefish were highly prized as food, calamari. Here, before this time, cuttlefish had been regarded only as bait. The fishermen called them black gold. Because there was so much ink about, I decided to colour the edge of the painting with it. This painting is called The Propeller. It's actually framed by oak staves from the side of a boat, which are there to protect it from abrasion when the otter boards are pulled up. The otter boards are used in trawling. And this is a summertime activity where some maintenance is going on. The painting finds us under the boat where Mark is refreshing the paint on the waterline. His brother, known as Podgy, has laid out a t-shirt for the puppy to sit on. This is the final painting on the first wall. It's called Will Sitting with His Back to the Sea. Will Joy is sitting rather deliberately with his back to the sea beside a pile of covered net, with the family dog Saxon beside him. Transistor radios were a feature on the beach, especially in summer. This is a more relaxed time when boat maintenance and net making go on. Paul, his son, chatting with his crew. One is holding a needle filled with twine for sewing or mending nets. Paul's two young sons are seen in the background with a fishing rod and old Bess. The unusual position of the boat pointing skywards is because they needed to inspect the keel for damage, and the old man who is holding it up fits exactly into it as if it was his coffin. It refers to a painting by Nicolas Poussin, and it's the shepherds in Arcadia, and it's a group of, they don't exactly look like shepherds in the original painting, but it's a group of people out for a walk in the woods, and they discover what looks like a tombstone, and it says Et in Arcadia ego, which means I too, death, am here. In my painting, the shepherds have become a group of friends out for a walk by the sea when they notice an inscription on the concrete wall. The shadow of the pointing man reinforces the drama of their discovery. I named this painting The Challenge, but it derives from a painting by Degas called The Young Spartans, which is in the National Gallery. What I apprehended in his work were moods, moments, and also, in spite of the evident mastery of draftsmanship, a certain kind of unfinished look which mystified me. Because I think that what is really important is the space and tension between the groups, I decided to materially separate them. I favour the tondo as a concise container shape. I closed off what in Degas is the background view with a Hastings low stone built wall. Putting any colour would prettify it, and that would have been against the message that I was trying to convey. The reason he's on his knees is because it's much more convenient to gut when you're than holding the fish up in the air to do it, especially when it's a cod. And the main thing about this is that the fluorescent oil frocks that are worn, that's one of the major differences in the look of fishing now as opposed to the historic works in the collection. It's a very strange shape to have chosen because it is rather coffin-like. And the gulls, as usual, are waiting there for the guts to come their way. Tim is sitting in the boat smashing crabs with a wooden mallet to clear them more easily from the nets. They have been caught by accident rather than design in the trammel nets and are too small to be saleable. The waste becomes food for the fish. If the claws are large enough, they will have been salvaged to sell or eat. The shape is reminiscent of a boat hull, chosen so that it would emphasise the bulk of the catch. Paul kneels in amongst the haul of dogfish with their disarming pale blue eyes. They swim in huge shoals. Ken, Paul's crew, is reaching into the boat to lift out a fish. Will, who always smoked thin cigars and wore a pork pie hat, is there. In the very distant background, men are carrying boxes of fish on their shoulders, shielded from the slime by their waterproofs worn like a cape. Weasel's reclining on a pile of nets with his grandchild in his lap. The interesting thing is that there was always somewhere to sit down or recline on the beach because the nets had to be stored there and they were always covered with old pieces of carpet or tarpaulin. They made sort of little natural hills, and it's the easiest place to flop down when you're tired. But in this case, it is a hot summer's day and everyone's relaxed, and the dogs too. This painting, Dark Shed, framed or contained, if you like, with the rubbing staves off a boat, like the propeller. Michael kneels in front of the old winch house. In there is the machinery which hauls the boat up the beach. He holds a Dover's sole which he is about to gut. There is a bowl of guts which the waiting gulls above know will be theirs. The crew is the young lad Wayne, who is exhausted and half asleep, drinking a can of Coke. Podgy perches on the wire from another winch, watching. Bodle also behind him. Fish in boxes are hauled on a small cart to market with a dog leading the way. This painting is called Keeping Company. He is making a net, which is the work of many hours, and has two companions and a dog to keep him company. There you can see Castle Hill faintly in the background, the heat haze. And at the other end of the painting, you can see Paul with his boat, which unusually has a mizzen sail, and he's got his father Will and the dog Bess with him. There's a contrast of action on the beach. There's manic activity, and then these moments of absolute calm when are filled with these other occupations which are chores. They have to be done, but they provide these times to just breathe and be, I think. And it has a sort of constancy, the alternating between intense labour and then not actually empty time because it's always filled. But the mood is very different. Before health and safety imposed itself on our ways, bonfires were a regular part of the life of the fishing beach. Organised rubbish collection did not happen, so things were either burnt in oil drum fires. The man on the left stands with his foot resting on an empty drum lying on its side, or on open fires for larger items, as in this case, amongst other stuff, a rotten wooden ladder. The winter mood is sombre, even though the transistor presides on a fish box, and the fire provides a focus to gather around. The condition of waiting is a perfected art form of the fishermen whose lives are built upon the seasons and the tides. It depicts one of the last of the old wooden luggers being demolished plank by plank. The bulldozer, which is the first of its tribe to arrive on the beach, is in front of the boat. The audience is an old man smoking and a younger man sitting on. His front seat is the car bonnet. He's drinking from a can and smoking, and the dog is sitting in the passenger seat. A new era begins. The sky is filled with gulls who are squawking angrily, and the shape of the painting has a choppy look to it. It is a destabilizing effect to emphasize the mood of dis-ease. The boat is being hauled on its wire up the steep slope of the beach back to its berth. Men are making sure that the greased railway sleepers on which the keel slides, known as trows, are properly placed. As ours is a beach-launched fleet, there is always this extra work for Hastings fishermen, getting the boat off and ashore again safely. 2 people are mending nets in the foreground. When you are working, creating something from nothing, you do not have an audience. There are so many moments of doubt to be negotiated, and usually there is nothing to tell you when you have succeeded. Unlike with a performance, there is no applause. As an artist, I experienced it in a dislocated and isolating way. Only later, if you were lucky enough to be able to show the work to others, might there be a chance to experience the act of communication. When we were planning this exhibition, I sifted through 3 or 4 boxes of archive containing the remarkable watercolour and print collection of the fishing industry, which are held by the museum. These were to be included for display, unframed and laid out flat. It became apparent, looking at these, that life on the state has remained largely unchanged until the present day, except in terms of technology. In the past, there were more boats in the fleet and more people were to be seen at work. Many people not directly involved with going to sea were always around, including myself, and this gave me an easy opportunity to move in close while I drew. Now, if you walk on the fishing beach by the water's edge, looking back up at the fleet, the remaining boats are poised to go off on the next tide. They are in a state of quiescence, and there is no sign of their skippers or crew. This is when they appear to be a wonderful still life. One of the earliest revelations I experienced was that, of necessity, the people who work here, whose territory this is, live in a time scale which is different to the rest of society. Their world is entirely subject to the natural rhythms of life and death. Due to this pandemic, we've all spent much more time in front of screens. Because of this, I think it needs to be pointed out that the experience of looking at a painting in real time and real space is very different for the onlooker than the artist, as is the singing or playing of a piece for the musician. You as an onlooker or audience need to take a breath or two as best you can and slow down. The work you were looking at took far longer to make than you are prepared to spend looking at it. Looking at a painting, although it is silent, is not only a visual experience, but something much more mysterious. It is bodily as well as to do with the alchemy of seeing things of the real world translated onto a flat surface. If the artist is good enough, you will apprehend it as real, at least for a time.